the last 80 years, the United Nations Charter has served as a wellspring of purpose and action for those who rise equal to the task of delivering its promise. There is no alternative to the United Nations. There is no good global order other than one based on international law and the principle of the sovereign equality of states. A rules-based order is indispensable. To maritime nations such as the Philippines, international law, particularly the 1982 Law of the Sea, is fundamental to our future. While our government vessels and fisher folk continue to be harassed in our own waters, and as we remain on the receiving end of illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous actions in the South China Sea, we abide by the UNCLOS as reinforced by the binding 2016 Arbitral Award on the South China Sea. We are committed to diplomacy and other peaceful means to settle disputes. Thank you and mabuhay.
I thank the Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the Philippines.
Representative of China.
Thank you, President. In response to the remarks made by some countries, China hereby exercises its right of reply. China has consistently maintained that the United Nations is not the appropriate forum for discussing South China Sea issues. However, in light of certain erroneous arguments, China deems it necessary to offer a solemn response. China's position on South China Sea arbitration case has been consistently clear. The arbitration case was unilaterally initiated in violation of the principle of the state consent, international law, including the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. The arbitral tribunal in South China Sea case exercised its jurisdiction ultra vires and rendered an award in disregard of law. Its ruling is illegal and null and void. China neither accepts nor recognizes the ruling, nor does it accept any claims or actions based on it. China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea remain unaffected by this ruling under any circumstances. The so-called ruling is an active example of international law and is by no means part of it. China's law enforcement activities in safeguarding its rights in maritime areas under its jurisdiction is beyond reproach. China has consistently advocated for peaceful settlement of disputes and will continue to resolve relevant disputes in the South China Sea through negotiation and consultation with directly concerned countries on the basis of respecting historical facts in accordance with international law. China will continue to work with ASEAN countries to jointly uphold peace and stability in China, South China Sea. Thank you, President.
I call on the representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, I wish to refer to the statement of China referring to the 2016 Arbitral Award, which is binding to all parties and final. The award was an affirmation of the dispute resolution mechanisms of the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. It authoritatively ruled that the claim of historic rights to resources within the seas falling within the 9-dash line had no basis in law and is without legal effect. It upholds the Philippines' sovereign rights and jurisdiction in its exclusive economic zone. It affirms that certain actions within the Philippine exclusive economic zones violated and continue to be violated the sovereign rights of the Philippines and are thus unlawful. That large-scale reclamation and construction of artificial islands causes severe environmental harm in violation of international conventions, and that large-scale harvesting of endangered marine species damages the marine ecosystem. We firmly reject attempts to undermine it. At the same time, we welcome the growing international support for the award. We therefore strongly urge China to respect and implement the 2016 Arbitral Award. Thank you, Mr. President.
I call on the representative of China for a second intervention.
Thank you, President. President, in view of the statement made by the representative of the Philippines, China feels it compelled to respond once again. The disputes between China and the Philippines on the South China Sea are in essence territorial and maritime delimitation disputes. Territorial matters fall outside the scope of UNCLOS. Furthermore, on the issue of maritime delimitation, China has excluded the application of dispute settlement procedures in its 2006 declaration made under UNCLOS. Therefore, the arbitral tribunal has no jurisdiction whatsoever over the subject of arbitration. Regrettably, however, the tribunal not only exercised ultra-vires jurisdiction but also rendered an unjust award. The so-called award disregarded legal principles and facts on issues of the regime of islands, historic rights, and outlying archipelagos of continental states, putting forth erroneous reasoning and conclusions. This seriously undermines the spirit and principles of the Convention and severely impacts the authority and integrity of international law of the sea. China does not accept or recognize the so-called South China Sea arbitration case. Our sole purpose is precisely to uphold the international rule of law in the maritime domain and to maintain a fair and reasonable international maritime order. China carries out peaceful and constructive activities on its own territories. This is a just right of a sovereign country. This is not the so-called artificial island reef. China places high importance on the protection of South China Sea's environment. Philippines' illegal military fleet in the island means that Philippines is the biggest destroyer of the South China Sea ecosystem. Philippines has repeatedly accused China. The sole purpose is to hide its fact of reneging on its promise and distorting the facts. We ask now Philippine colleagues to return to the correct path of resolving the South China Sea issue based on dialogue, instead of playing up the South China Sea issue on the multilateral platform. This will not facilitate the settlement of the dispute, but rather this will escalate the tensions and leading to enhanced mistrust. I thank you, President.
Call on the representative of the Philippines for a second intervention.
Mr. President, with respect to the second intervention made by China, I would like to reiterate that the 2016 arbitral award is final and binding. It is in line with the 1982 UNCLOS. This evening, our Secretary of Foreign Affairs emphasized that to maritime nations such as the Philippines, international law, particularly the 1982 UNCLOS, is fundamental to our future. While our government vessels and fisher folk continue to be harassed in our own waters, and as we remain on the receiving end of illegal, coercive, aggressive, and dangerous actions in the South China Sea, we abide by the UNCLOS as reinforced by the binding 2016 arbitral award on the South China Sea. We are also committed to diplomacy and to the peaceful means of settling international disputes under the Charter of the United Nations, as reinforced by the 1982 Manila Declaration. Again, we strongly urge China to respect and implement the 2016 arbitral award on the South China Sea. Thank you, Mr. President.